life and his ministry. And then if you have questions, I'll do my best to answer those. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. So, I don't know if can you all see this? Maybe no, it doesn't look like it. Can you see this picture?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, this is a picture of Venerable Pierre Toussaint when he was about 46 years old, a dapper young man. He has an interesting story. Now, I knew much more about some of the other candidates for sainthood than I did about Pierre Toussaint, but I did read read a very good biography about him and another book on him as well. And he had a really interesting life. In some ways, it's hard to envision what his life was like because he lived back in the 19th century. But and here we are in the 21st century. But he confronted some of the same issues that we confront today. I'll share a little bit about him. He was born in 1766, and that date is approximate because I've seen other dates, but it's around 1766 at the mid 18th century, and he died in 1853. He was born on the island of Saint Domingue, which is currently the island of Haiti and Dominican Republic. But he grew up there, and at that time he was born as an enslaved person. He had an interesting life, and the way things were set up back there on the island, most of the planters, the plantation owners, were French, and they came to get rich. They came to the island to get rich, to get as much money as they could and as quickly as they could, so they could eventually retire and retire back in Paris. And that was their dream. But this was a really busy time on the island. There was a lot of conflict. There were revolts of all kinds. And as you might remember in your history, Haiti obtained its freedom by 1804, obtained its freedom. So in the midst of all of the conflict of the struggles for freedom among the enslaved people, fighting against the planter class, the family that owned Pierre's family, the Berards, moved to New York to escape that violence. So they came to New York, and he was, as a free man, one of the first things he did was to change his last name. He was freed actually in 1807 as a young man, and he changed his last name to Toussaint. And there's question about why he chose Toussaint. It might have been for Toussaint Louverture, who was the leader of the revolution in Haiti. It could have been that, or it could have been because he chose All Saints Day to be to take his name from that. So any people who take French, any of you all who study French, Toussaint means All Saints, right? And so, any French speakers in the room?
Anyone take French?
Nobody take French?
Well, we got one. We have one, Rebecca. You can't see her. She's on the other side of the room.
Okay. Let's give a shout out for the French. I took French in high school and college, and a beautiful language. So anyway, because he was part of a French colony and had French upbringing, he grew up Catholic. I mean, the French were Catholic at that point. The Spanish were Catholic, and yet he found himself, when he came to the United States in New York. He came with the family in New York before he was freed. He found that there was a strong anti-Catholic sentiment, because the United States is really a Protestant country, it's mostly a Protestant country in its thinking. And Catholicism is one of the larger minority groups, if you will, in the country, in the United States today. But at that time, there was a lot of hatred toward Catholics. And there was, of course, a lot of hatred toward people of African descent as well. And with the Haiti Revolution, right, just a few years before, people were afraid that there may be further rebellions, there may be further violence. But Pierre wasn't that kind of man. And let me tell you a little bit more about who he was. They call him the father of Catholic charity because of his charitable outreach. And I'll share with you a little bit about his personality. I mentioned that he was a devout Catholic. He was known to keep a prayer book in his pocket, and he loved catechetical materials, anything about the Lord he was very interested in. And he was an apprentice as a hairdresser, a hairstylist. And that put him in touch with the rich and famous in New York. As he went off on his own, he formed his own business as a successful entrepreneur, and he whatever curled and styled the hair of very rich, mostly Protestant, but very rich white New Yorkers, New York women. But because of that, that put him in a circle to hear all kinds of things about what was happening in the world, was happening both in the United States, happening, with the presidents, what's happening in the church, to just be in the know, in the grapevine. If you know how it is when you go to a hairdresser or a barber shop, you hear all kinds of things, right? Well, he was seeing these private clients in their homes and helping them to look beautiful for their social events. He made a lot of money doing this. And some people question, well, why would he do that? Why would he use his money? Why would he make his money that way? Couldn't he do something else? Well, it was a noble profession. He was in business for himself. He made a lot of money, and he used that money to help many, many other people. I'll touch on that again in a minute. Let me ask, does anybody have any questions so far?
None.
One?
No.
Nobody. Okay.
So good. Yeah, you're great. You're knocking it out of the box.
Okay, that's good. So even though he was born into slavery, he did receive his freedom. He could have purchased his own freedom because he was making that much money. He was making about $1,000 a year at that time, $1,000 a year per client. He was so well known and so beloved. Part of it was certainly his style, and the ladies felt good about whatever he did, the magic he performed on their hair. But he felt, but they also liked his personality. He was charming, he was funny, he was respectful, he was dignified. They say he was a tall man for his time. At that point, he was like 5'9", and that was considered pretty tall. When you look at some of the presidents, like I think Thomas Jefferson was like 5'4". So that was kind of the average for a man at the time. At that time was around 5'4", 5'5", 5'6". Anyway, he's a tall man. He was known to be very, very generous. I'm gonna get to that in a minute. But beyond that, he was also very intelligent, hardworking. They say he worked like 12 to 16 hours a day. And he walked to his clients' homes every day, because there were streetcars, but the streetcars passed him by because they refused to pick up a Black man. Okay, and this is in New York, where you think New York is very liberal. No, New York it was difficult for a lot of free Blacks in New York to make it. But because of that, his heart was really touched. He really understood the plight of his people and the plight of other people who were down and out, who were refugees, who were travelers, who were coming to the United States or coming to New York for a better way of life. He was really known to be just very creative. I mentioned charming, refined. They say he was very independent and very intelligent, meaning, for example, he was a devout Catholic, but when somebody told him on his deathbed that they would run and get the priest for him so he could, say his last confession, he said, "I'll confess to God. I only confess to God." So he was devout Catholic, but he had his own mind about things too. And where he could have been rebellious, there was a lot happening both in New York and in Haiti before he left there. There was a lot happening where he could have jumped into to fight in the revolution, or to become a revolutionary himself, or to become an activist against the many harms that free Black people were experiencing at the time. I mean, people really, their safety was not secured. There was a Fugitive Slave Act. Are you familiar with the Fugitive Slave Act?
Yeah.
Anybody? Give a nod or raise a hand or something. Okay, somebody knows. The Fugitive Slave Act meant that, and if you ever saw like Solomon Northup, the movie about Solomon Northup, 12 Years a Slave or something like that, they could be snatched off the street and put on boats and shipped down to Mississippi or, Louisiana, Alabama, and if they didn't have their manumission papers or the papers that stated that they were free, and even sometimes if they did have proof that they had that they were legally free, they could still be swept away. And so it's a very difficult time. And the Black community had to look out for each other, to pass the word about safe places to be and places not to be, people to trust and not trust. And it was very important to be upstanding and dignified. You didn't want to appear drunk in public. You didn't want to be rowdy, because those could be reasons to put you in jail and sweep you away. Okay, so it was really, really a dangerous time. But they say that he wasn't really an activist, but he did with loving service. He built good bridges of friendship with other people because of his kindness and his generosity. Also, during that time, there's a lot of sickness in both in Haiti and then later in New York. You had all kinds of, you had typhoid, yellow fever, like we're dealing with COVID today. They had those kind of issues back then as well. And he was, but he tended to the sick. And even when other people left the city because of the various plagues coming through New York, he stayed to help people who were sick and dying. Another thing he did was to help those who were formerly enslaved, to teach them skills and to connect them with people who could give them jobs and help them to become self-sufficient. He was very, very industrious. He was a person you could say, do you know people who were just people? He was a people person. He was a man who could just make connections for people. If somebody needed a job, he knew how to help them get that. If somebody was looking for certain kinds of spices, they say he made a mean gumbo, coming from that Creole country. Really it made a mean gumbo. So he knew about spices and cooking. He knew how to connect people with opportunities, and he was doing that all the time. He gave a lot of money to the local churches in the area. And one fun fact I just learned was that the church that he attended, he was a parishioner at St. Peter's, which was the first Catholic church in New York. And at the same time, Elizabeth Ann Seton was a parishioner at that same parish. Now, they probably would have not have known each other. They may have known each other because there were so few Black Catholics in that parish. Out of 2,000 parishioners, they may have been 100 or less of Black Catholics. So that was one thing. And then he was also just well known. He could connect people. If somebody needed help, they were traveling and they needed somebody to look out for their house for them and make sure that the servants took care of certain repairs and things while they were gone. He was the man to call. And he made such good friends with a lot of people. And he was always reliable. He was always that person who could help answer their questions that they could speak to. And just as a lot of people confide in their hairdressers and barbers, people did that, they do that today, they did that back then. And they found that he was a willing ear, and he had a lot of wisdom. He was able to give them a lot of good advice. And in terms of his spirituality, though, the thing that really impressed me was that he went to Mass every day. My grandfather used to go to Mass every day, and my mother too. Every day they went to Mass, and so the faith was really there with him. He used to quote scripture and memorize scripture. He could read and write, and much of what we know about him is through letters, but he quoted scripture. And when his clients came to him with problems and concerns, he was often able to pass on the wisdom that he had gained from his relationship with the Lord. He had a very close relationship with the Lord, walked to Mass every day, and then walked to his client's house. And even as he got older and had some arthritis in his leg, he still took that walk every day. So, he was very close to God. They say he really loved the Sermon on the Mount, and especially the Beatitudes. And so he could quote those scriptures about that. And he really tried to live by the Beatitudes as well. He shared his faith in word and deed. And I mentioned a couple of things that he did in terms of helping the formerly enslaved, helping those who are orphans. He and his wife, Juliet, the love of his life, took in orphans to live with them and to care for them. There was a big fire at one point, and a lot of people lost their businesses and their homes, and he did too. He and his wife did too, but they still helped other people who were in need whenever they could. It is said that even when he was very old, people encouraged him, just retire, just stop working. Why don't you just rest? And he said, but if I rest, I can't do more. His idea was, I want to help others. And if I rest, I don't have the money to bring in. In fact, the lady who was formerly his mistress, Mrs. Farrar, she freed him on her deathbed, almost on her deathbed. But when she did, prior to that, he continued working before she freed him. He continued working to help her to stay afloat, really. her husband had died and she had no means of income, and she lived off of him with her children, and he provided enough for them. He provided enough to buy other people's freedom. He bought his wife's freedom. He bought his niece's freedom. He and his wife didn't have any children, but they raised the niece and they adopted. They had a lot of orphans that they raised as well, and they brought into their home. I think his faith really spoke a lot for him. He speaks for himself. His actions spoke a lot for him. He didn't have to say it, but he shared his faith. You know, as he's doing the ladies' hair, he would talk to them about the Lord and about things, his understanding of what God's word was saying to him. He was very, very, very talented, and he used that to his advantage. So he wasn't an opportunist, but he used the opportunities he had to help others, to provide dignity for others and a dignified life for others, to uplift them, to help them to stay connected to their faith. A lot of people were, a lot of Catholics at that time even, were just Catholic in name only, you know, and it didn't mean as much to them, the faith. It wasn't a lived experience, but for him, it clearly was a lived experience. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that you may want to know about him. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
Yeah, there's a question about that came up about the path to sainthood.
Yes.
And the processes, and if you know by any chance where Venerable Pierre Toussaint is at this point.
Absolutely. His cause was the first of the 6 that was raised. You know, his cause was the first, and he's waiting for a couple of miracles now, or we're waiting for a couple of miracles now for him. So he was elevated from, you know, a servant of God to venerable, and then we're waiting for another. We're waiting for the next miracle. His cause has been open for a long time. And at one time they thought that the guild was closing, that there was nobody, but the guild is still active in New York. And one of the things in New York that they do, there's a brother Tyrone Davis in New York who has, they have one of the things that the guild does, they keep the name of Pierre Toussaint alive and keep his cause alive. And every year they have a fabulous gala that they raise money for scholarships for young people and going to high school and college. And that's been they've been doing that for many years. That's where his cause is right now.
Okay.
We're hoping, you know, and the way it goes, we have 6 candidates on the path to sainthood, and yet the idea is that they generally are not canonized as a group. They're generally canonized as individuals, but they're getting a lot of traction these days with the beautiful prayer cards that have been put out and some recent biographies about them. And so, my picture is crazy. There he is.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
There he is. Yeah, I gotta get it in the right spot, right? So we got the prayer cards. We've got prayer cards for you.
I didn't tell them that, but ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Grimes is donating prayer cards of Venerable Pierre Toussaint to you, to the classes. I just have to go pick them up.
That's easy.
She's donating these cards to you.
Oh, and you know, and does anybody know why it's important to even to pray for a saint? What's the difference between just a saint and a holy person? Any thoughts about that?
What makes a saint a saint? Oh, they're buzzing.
Oh, they are.
Chapetta. She said they're in heaven.
All right, where we want to be one day. Yes, exactly. Okay. And the way people become saints is that people talk about them. They talk about them, and they talk about the goodness of their lives and the good witness that they left us with. And that's what's happened with all of the 6 that you've been hearing about. And Venerable Pierre Toussaint is no different. We're hoping that he will be canonized. His cause was open back in late 80s, I think, 1980 something. I believe. Well, his cause was opened by Cardinal Cook, of New York.
Okay.
And then in 1990, there was a little bit of renewal there, because as people started to learn more about him and what he had done in the city of New York for the Archdiocese of New York, and how charitable he was. He funded many churches. Many churches were, it's not like the Catholic Church was really rich in the United States at that time. It was a struggling church in a lot of ways, and parishes would form, and priests almost had nothing to eat. And so sometimes he did also create hostels for travelers, including priests who were coming through New York. He gave a lot of money to individual churches, to the construction of the cathedral, St. Patrick's Cathedral, even though he couldn't go into St. Patrick's Cathedral. He would not have been allowed to go into St. Patrick's Cathedral. But today he's the only layman who is buried in the crypt, in the bishop's crypt at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And the kneeler that he and his wife, Juliet, used to kneel on to pray is behind the altar at St. Patrick's Cathedral.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. That says not everybody gets buried in the cathedral, and he's the only layman.
I knew that because every year I would go up to the open. I go to mass at the cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I got on their mailing list, and it's every year like clockwork.
I know they want money. They want something.
But it's beautiful. The cathedral, St. Patrick's, is like unbelievably beautiful. And I knew he was buried there, but I didn't know about the kneeler.
So the kneeler is right behind the altar there. And then, and so, he's just been a real godsend for the Catholic faith. And in a time when Catholicism, as I mentioned, there's a strong anti-Catholic sentiment in the city and in the country. And he still held his own with that, and still supported the church and believed in his faith and wouldn't abandon his faith. Now, they say that he liked, how they have different forms of spirituality. How you may have heard of Jesuit spirituality, or Franciscan, or Augustinian, or different.
Yes.
Benedictine. Okay, different. It's the same faith, but just different ways of expressing different spiritual practices. And they say that he liked, he preferred a French spirituality. I don't know what that is, but there's something about the French theologians and a French spirituality. But of course, coming from Haiti and speaking French and coming from that French cultural environment, that would be a very natural fit for him. Let's see. He died I do have a couple of pictures of him as an older man. He died when he was in his 70s. So he lived quite a long time. And you saw the first picture when he was like 46. This is him. Let me see. No, you can't see it. It's my background is crazy. Oh, well, I'm not sure how to show it to you. When he was 50, when he was 76, 70 something. And then picture of his, this is a good book about his life that it's, and it's just called, it's Pierre Toussaint. It's a biography by Arthur Jones. This book has so much good information about him. And also it helps you to envision the times and the environment that he lived in. When he was in Haiti, they talked even about the weather, how hot it was, how the planter class really just wanted to come in, get the money and go. And those who were lucky enough to do that did. And many others weren't able to do that, and they stayed. But it was a brutal, brutal reality for the enslaved persons who lived there under colonialism. Very brutal. Life expectancy was very, very, very low. And maybe you've heard that we have a new nation in the world. Barbados is now an independent nation. Did you hear that in the news? Anybody? No? Oh, somebody heard. Okay, good. Does anybody have Caribbean roots in the class? Anybody have any Caribbean roots? No? Okay. Well, hey, but Barbados is now, they are now, Queen Elizabeth is no longer their monarch. They're not a monarchy, they're their own nation now. And that's as of just a couple of days ago.
Oh.
Huh?
I didn't hear that. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes, just a couple of days, about 2 days ago. They did. They had a big ceremony, and Prince Charles went and recognized them as a sovereign nation and apologized for the brutality of colonialism and slavery in Barbados.
I don't know how they got by.
The main news doesn't pick up on some of these exciting things that are hopeful. We get a whole lot of other stuff, but this is really hopeful. Now they've had their independence for more than 50 years. when a lot of other Caribbean countries, Jamaica and others, declared their independence. Well, they've had that, but they didn't separate from the monarchy. And so now they're totally separate from the monarchy, and they have their own president who is a woman. I don't remember her name. But she's a woman.
So was that thing Rihanna? Was that?
Yes. And Rihanna is a national classic or whatever.
Okay.
National treasure. And she performed, Rihanna performed there. Yeah.
All right. Now
they
it's
honored
making
her.
sense. Okay. Now it's making sense.
Now it's making, yeah. So you heard about Rihanna, but they didn't say the other part, right?
Exactly.
Oh boy.
Well,
So, I mean, anything that you can think of that people would need, even today, like a credit union. He formed a credit union, operated a credit bureau.
Wow. Yeah.
He just did a lot. He did so much, and in the way of helping people in need. And that was his heart's desire. He enjoyed it. He worked to do it. He loved to do it. And his wife was just as devoted to that as he was. And he and his wife and his niece that he adopted were all buried in the same place until his remains got removed and taken over to the cathedral. So that was another kind of interesting thing, I thought. They wanted to be buried together, and they were, and then he got uprooted. but for an honor, but for an honor.
Yes, it is. All right. Does anyone have any questions about the Venerable Pierre Toussaint? Yes, Maddie, go ahead. Why didn't he say one more time? Oh, why did he choose not to turn to more activism? Yeah, in his mission, ministry, etc.
We don't know exactly. We can speculate, but I think he was very devoted to his faith. He felt that he could do more. He could do more with his money, and with his friendship with people, bridging that and helping people. So that's why I think he didn't want to take on the activism. And also, it's very dangerous. I think, the one author that I read does allude to the fact that he was probably sympathetic with the activists, but that wasn't his path. That wasn't his personality. He was a very independent thinker. And this way he could do sort of, under the radar, he could fly under the radar in a way, buying people buying their freedom, helping them get established in businesses, helping them relocate and find safe housing and things like that. So I think he was doing it in his own way, but he wasn't one to protest. And there were all kinds of protests going on at the time, protests about the way people were being treated, but in the church as well as in the cities, in society. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, she said thank you.
You're
next
welcome.
question. Would Toussaint have been before Frederick Douglass, after Frederick Douglass, or during the same time?
He would have been a contemporary of Frederick Douglass.
Oh.
He would have been a contemporary of Frederick Douglass. If we think of, let's see, when was Frederick? Well, he would have been a contemporary.
Okay.
19th, because we're talking 19th.
1860s.
Yeah, because he was born, 18. He was 8. I think he died in. Yeah, so the dates I have, he was born in 1766, and he died in 1853, roughly. But so Frederick Douglass would have been, Frederick Douglass was alive at that time.
Yes.
He was the was he an ambassador? Not ambassador. Well, sort of like an ambassador to Haiti. I don't know what the actual term was, but an ambassador to Haiti.
Right.
When Haiti was a free country.
Okay. That's an interesting note to make, especially in terms of abolitionism and being an activist for. Wow. All right. Any other questions? We call this burning desire time. Someplace they call altar call. This is where you got your chance, your last chance. It's not every day we get to see Mrs. Grimes, though she speaks all over the country, and she's right 20 minutes away from us. in DC, but this lady is someone whose career is to be emulated, and I mean that in all due humility, that's the person she is.
Thank you.
She's not going to tout her own horn, but she is responsible for a lot of the things we see within the church. And don't look at her as just being for African Americans. She's for the Catholic Church universal.
Right.
But her ministry is right there at the USCCB. All right. Well, thank you, Mrs. Grimes.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you coming today. Let's give her a round of applause, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening, and so glad to be with you.
Thank you. And I'll get, when you're scheduled, you're okay, I'll come and get those cards for them.
That'll be great. Unless you want me, we can talk. If you want me to put them in the mail, I can do that. But it'd be good to see you in person too.
Yes, ma'am. I agree. I will bring you, have a little something for you.
Oh, thank you. This has been a treat. So you all keep studying hard, and thank you so much for your interest in these 6 candidates. And if you can, if you get anything out of that, just thinking about their spirituality, that's the most important thing. All the adversity they had to accomplish, overcome, and now they're on the path to sainthood, and you can help make that happen. Okay, you can make it happen.
All right.
Thanks so much.
All right, y'all.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.